Thank you for coming. I'm Eric. I am a member of the Film Critics Society and one of the many people who helped put this screening together. You all are here for an evening with Sky Hopinka, a program of Sky's short form work that's co-presented by the Seattle Film Critics Society and the Northwest Film Forum. As part of our annual awards, the Seattle Film Critics Society presents the John Hartl Pacific Northwest Spotlight Award, which is named in honor of the late Seattle Times film critic to commemorate the outstanding work of someone with local ties to the region. Sky is our recipient of the award this year, and this program is just one part of our celebration of Sky's work. The actual presentation of the award is going to occur on May 17th for a screening of Sky's new feature, Powell People, which is showing twice this weekend as part of this year's SIF. And I highly encourage you all to go check it out because it's fantastic. Descended from the Hotonka Nation and the Pechanga band of Luiseño Indians, Sky was born in Ferndale, Washington, and a lot of his work is really rooted in the landscapes, the histories, the communities of the Pacific Northwest. During his time at Portland State, Sky both learned and taught Shinnecoawa, a language indigenous to the Columbia River Basin. Sky's artistic practice developed alongside that, encompassing moving image work, still photography, and text. And a lot of the issues related to language revitalization, the relationship between language and community, the contemporary evolution of indigenous cultures, and those relationships to both personal and political histories sort of recur throughout a lot of his work. When you watch his films, you'll probably notice his iridescent, evocative treatment of landscape and the musical way he layers images, sounds, texts, archival materials. They're intimate, they're intuitive, but they're also mythological in scope and effect. It's really a privilege that we're able to see them all in a screening like this. Sky's work has played in major festivals including Toronto, Sundance, New York, Ann Arbor, and his work is also exhibited at museums and galleries all over the world, including Capitol Hill's own Frye Art Museum. He's a Guggenheim Fellow, a MacArthur Fellow, and I think it's worth noting that Sky has made major contributions in fostering a community of Indigenous experimental filmmakers. He's the co-founder of the Cousin Collective, which provides practice support for cohorts of Indigenous artists. The Cousin Collective has also put together a special edition of the Media City Film Festival dedicated to Indigenous experimental cinema. And Sky also helped put together a first of its kind critical anthology on Indigenous experimental film called Temporal Territories. We're really, really lucky to have Sky with us today. I think maybe I'll invite him to say a few words. We'll be around afterwards for a conversation. And then afterwards, we have a reception set up at Stoop, just a few blocks away to hang out for a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you. It's so good to be here. It's so good to be back in the Northwest. I grew up in Ferndale and Bellingham, so it's home. I went to school in Portland State. I'm looking forward to talking afterwards, and thank you again for the invitation and the opportunity to share some of his works here in the space this time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing films with us. It's so great to see them on the big screen. I think maybe just there's so much. It's hard to figure out where to go to start, but maybe the way in is to ask about your relationship with the Pacific Northwest. What does it evoke for you? What are the different emotions you feel towards it? Personally, I feel when I first saw your films that they capture something really specific about the land that I can't quite describe. But yeah, maybe what are the emotions you associate with it, and how has it changed personally, artistically over the years?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, I was born in Bellingham, which is like in Whatcom County, like the big city. But I grew up in Ferndale, which is, in Kicking the Clouds, the town that you see for the most part. A bit of Bellingham, but it's a place that's, I call home. When I was 12 or 13 years old, is like when I moved to Southern California. My mom and stepdad got a job at a casino down there, like the Indian gaming industry. So I moved, but I returned. I don't know, in some ways, like the Northwest has always been the defining moment of how to process Native diaspora. You know, like I mean, my mom, her tribe is from Southern California. My dad's tribe, his tribe's from like Wisconsin, but they ended up in Washington. And there's something about being part of the community up there. Part of, you know, a lot of my cousins are Lummi, my family's Lummi, but I'm not. And at an early age, you kind of start to learn like the boundaries of like where you're from and where you're not from, what you have access to and what you don't, based on like, you know, tribal access and things like that. So that was like really important for me in terms of like not only like growing up here, but also at the same time not being from here. And so I think about that a lot through the work. And I think a lot of the work too is like trying to find ways to describe one's own relationship with landscape and history and language and story. So I think that's like what I'm trying to do with that. But at the same time, you know, it's like where I'm from, and so it always feels good to be home.
Yeah, I mean, that relationship between the individual, the collective, the landscape, to history is so central to all of your films, and I find so beautiful about it. And I think something that I've always wondered about your work is a lot of it is so almost diaristic and like spontaneous, but it's connected to all these different layers of like text, whether it's your text or and I'll remember yours, Diane Burns' text, or these recordings with your grandma and Kicking the Clouds. How do you go about even like starting that? Are you filming the landscapes with the text in mind? How do these films sort of form themselves?
I mean, I think they do form themselves in a lot of ways, like where we might have like different ideas, like that film with Diane, like I'll remember you as you were, not as what you'll become. I mean, that was like 3 or 4 years in the making, but I made it in like 3 months. And I mean that because, like, you know, I came across like Diane's recording or like a video of her at the American Indian Community House in New York, and I just like I had that on my desktop for like 2 or 3 years, and there were some other things that I was like working through with like Ho-Chunk relationships to reincarnation, like a reincarnation myths, and my relationship to anthropologists and the texts that they had extracted like 120 years ago. And when I knew I wanted to make a film, like I just kind of drew into these different sort of resources that I had, like Diane's poetry, the Paul Radin texts, and the films, or I guess like the video that I was shooting around Oregon and in Portland. And I just like tried to find a way to make them all be in communication with each other, or see the different ways that they could. Like my questions around Native or like Ho-Chunk reincarnation, at the same time wanting to really honor Diane and really just share her work with people. And those things seem to be a conversation, so in that sense it felt like trying to find different elements that I was thinking through and how could they be a conversation through the motive video or through like a short film or through just like the processing of like a 10-minute experience.
Totally, I think this time while I was watching it, one of the lines of texts from one of the poems really stood out to me about existence not being tied to these, to the senses, and the sort of, maybe just like the, I don't know, like extra affective sort of feeling that your films sometimes evoke. Maybe just staying on this film, I wanted to hear you talk about the calligrams. I think that's such a beautiful part of, just love to hear you talk about the tourism making.
Yeah, first in like there's a French poet named Apollinaire who passed away, was killed during World War I, and he had a collection of poems like called calligrams, which would be sort of like concrete shaped poems, so they're a little bit different. And I was really enamored by the idea of the calligram. And at the same time, in Wisconsin, there are all over the states, there are these giant earthen mounds, like as big as this room, probably as tall as like the last seat, you know, in different shapes. So like, you know, birds, thunderbirds, water spirits, you know, bear, deer, and they're all over the state. They demarcate different sort of relationships to our clans and to our rituals, and they're also burial mounds. But, you know, as what happens in the late 1800s, you know, amateur archaeologists, during that time, they would dig them up. They'd have picnics, they would dig them up. And it was a spectacle. But one of the things that came out of that was this idea that's put forth by these amateur archaeologists and anthropologists is that the native people that had made these must have been so magnificent that they're no longer here anymore, or just like where they've gone. And the native people here now must be squatters because how could they have made these things? And that sort of relationship to, I don't know, like belittling native people on these different sort of lands relates to manifest destiny and also provenance, where, especially today where there is no lineage, or it's gotten a lot better actually, but if you go to an effigy mound park in Wisconsin, it'll often say like the Native American tribe. It will name who the tribe was. There's like political reasons and cultural reasons and social reasons, but a lot of that has to do with just like land rights, where if we name this tribe, then we have to go back, like per necra, or just like different laws that are in place. And but it's something that persists around like native culture. And so I wanted to make these calligrams in the shape of effigy mounds, using appropriated texts as a way to, I don't just like point towards these confluences or these complications of like how to look at these different sort of ideas of land and landscape and structures and burials and these different sorts of things. It's a lot to contain within like, you know, the shape of a bird effigy and 2 or 3 sentences of text, but it's just like that's the thinking that I was going through while making them. And I've made a number of them since, but the one in the film tonight was the first one.
Yeah, I mean, something that really stood out in what you just said that I think is part of a lot of the films is this idea of like the past being this fixed thing, especially in relation to Indigenous history. You're talking about these Indigenous peoples that are almost like completely separate from Indigenous culture today. A lot of your work, I think, is about what Indigenous culture looks like in the present and connecting it to the past. I think that's a key part of painting spells with the myth, but also, of course, Dislocation Blues, set on Standing Rock. What was that process like, filming in Standing Rock, and the different considerations that go into not wanting to, I assume, make like an anthropological text about Standing Rock. I wanted to hear more about that.
Yeah, with that film too, I mean, like a big question for me personally is just like, what am I going to do there? Like, what am I bringing to the space? And so I didn't go in the summer because I didn't have an answer to that question, but when things started really getting intense in the fall, I felt like I had to go, I wanted to go, or like I needed to go. But still, you know, I went to the camera for like 1 week and I didn't quite know what I wanted to do there. I didn't feel right filming everything. I remember like walking through the camps and just like filming, but also just like, I don't want to film. And so I deleted everything I filmed because it's just like walking through the camps, you see like, this is like everyone's homes and like, this is people like living, and what am I doing here as enacting the gaze of the tourist? And that first week, I think I shot like maybe 2 hours of film, but most of that was like interviews for a friend who was on assignment for some news outlet. But even still, you know, like I remember when I first got to the camp, we checked in with the media tent, do you have a camera, do you want to shoot? And the person there told us that it was just like, there's like 200 camera crews here right now, which is like a lot, you know?
at first I thought like there was going to be like a whole bunch of Standing Rock films, but there really didn't turn out to be that many, and I wonder why. You know, it's, I don't know. I think that says a lot, but it also just like points to something that I think we're still reconciling. I mean, like what's also funny too about that time is like that was 2016 in the summer. You know, it was like before the election, and it's such a marker too. The last like 10 years of what has happened. You know, like when you have a movement that is, I guess, indigenous-led or just like any sort of like non-Western white-led movements, and at the same time you have Trump coming into office, you have all these different sort of things like changing, or just like the effects of a long-standing effect of change. And it's just like, where are we at right now with that? I don't know. I mean, I just remember like what a big thing Facebook was during this time, and you know, like how that has changed. But still, I think it's just like that points to just like making the film. I knew I was going to be part of like this history, or this also like this lineage of filming protesting movements, filming like resistance, and like what do you want to say with this? And the thing that I really wanted to say, more so than trying to describe the event, was just trying to, I don't know, like show the questions that arise from that. Because like editing the film too, it took a long time. I mean, it took me a long time before I could even look at the footage. But really the question that I entered the edit with was like, how do we process this? Like, who do we talk to about the things that happened there? Like, how do we be critical of this thing, and to whom? You know, like sometimes it doesn't feel safe to be critical of these things that are really on the outskirts of like resistance, because you don't want to undermine it. But still, just the question is like, how do you process this?
Yeah, for sure. At what point did the two interviews make it into the film?
Well, those are the only two interviews that I did. Kind of by design, but also just like, I don't know, I mean, the first person I interviewed was Terry, who was the voice of the here. And with that interview, like, I mean, I don't know, just like, he's just someone I really encounter in camp, like, day to day, and just like, he talked shit, we joke around, and like, he was just a sweetheart, you know? So I interviewed him. And then with Cleo, with Francis, like, we could have missed each other, but I interviewed them 2 months after the fact, like in February, March of 2017. And at that point too, like, I knew I didn't want to like get scattered in the voices, or just like have this presentation of this being a film that is encompassing what happens, you know? Because I've always been very resistant to this idea of the authoritative voice of the film. The documentary film, like I'm making a documentary about Standing Rock, and like the audience expects to hear the story of Standing Rock. What happened? What was the impetus? What's the history? Where's the animations that show you how things existed? You know, like the boundary lines and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like this. It's not the film that I want to make. You know, there will be those films, and hopefully those are those films. But it's just like, how can this film exist as a small point amongst all the many other stories that are being told? And how can its incompleteness also speak to that? You know, that felt really important too. Where, I don't know, this is I don't know. Sometimes what can happen is just like every marginalized artist wants to be the marginalized artist, you know? And I think it's really important to try to make space for others to share the voice and to share the burden, but also just like, you know, share the story, because it doesn't come from one singular voice.
Totally. Yeah, maybe before we have some audience questions, what you were talking about with authority and the changing role of screens, it brought to mind the process of rewatching most of your films in the process of this, and just remembering the context that I saw them in, whether that was my laptop, I've seen some film screenings, or some in like gallery installations, or they exist in these other forms. Like I think I've seen a multi-channel version of Painting Spells somewhere. And I think some of these, I think I saw Kicking the Clouds in the Fry a few years ago. And this idea that these films themselves, there's no like authoritative form, the slipperiness of how they're encountered. Yeah, I would love to hear you speak about the fluidity of the medium moving.
And I think video is a very exciting form. I think moving images as well. I mean, on one hand, like it's so ridiculous right now with like the cameras that we have like, in our pockets and that are cheap and that are available, and how much like moving image we ingest. But at the same time, it's a really exciting form because it's very responsive to, I guess, like what we want to do with it. I mean, that's what drew me in like 15, 16 years ago when I got a DSLR in 2010, 11. It was just like I can afford to shoot HD video. I can edit on my laptop. I can record on a Zoom recorder. Like I can do everything. And so there's something very freeing about that. And I don't know, I never wanted to be a filmmaker or just like be caught in the sort of trap of like, I can't make this film because I didn't get funding or support or a budget. And so just like that really informed my practice too, of just like making things on the fly or just making things with what was available to me. I mean, in terms of just like when I'm driving somewhere, I'm working on, you know, some project, or I'm visiting friends, or I'm working through an archive. I don't know, I think that like, that speaks to just a lot of like what I think many other people respond to when it comes to making work for themselves. I mean, like the quiet videos you make on your own, or the quiet things you write on your own, the quiet things you make on your own, I think are really beautiful. And it's just like, kind of, like how does that sort of reflect or build a larger sort of base of what you want to do and build on? You know, like I'm, as a language teacher, I'm really a big fan of scaffolding. You know, like where do you start? Because you can't start up here, you got to start down here. And so where do you build, and where do you build, and where do you build? And so I think digital media and like video like really does that for me. Or it's allowed me to shoot on 16mm, you know? Like, I mean, I had no idea how you shoot on 16 when I was, you know, first getting started. It's like a fucking mystery, you know? But, you know, I met some people and I took some classes and I learned, but I don't know, that's just like one trajectory, one pathway, but I still think that it's I guess like whatever art form you make, it's very responsive to like where you come from and where you're at and what you want to do with it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Do we have time for audience questions? I don't know if there's somebody to say, but if there's anyone in the audience with questions.
I noticed in your film that, or some of your films, like the process of mediation as like almost a point that drew attention to itself, whether it's like you're filming your laptop or you're doing an interview or archival footage. And I was thinking, or the layering and the mediation of your techniques, and just wondering how that mediation interacts with the kind of representation, whether it's self-representation or representation of another, and also storytelling, like interact together. Like, is the mediation something you always have in mind, or is it something, again, that appears, and how does it kind of subvert usual filmic narratives?
I mean, I feel like it's something that's like responsive to a situation, you know? Like, I mean, I guess what I first think about is like Dislocation Blues with Cleo on the laptop screen. And like, that was just a byproduct of, like, I wanted to interview them and we kept on listening to each other. Like, when I was living in Standing Rock, Cleo was there for the week, and then when I came back, they were leaving, and we just understood each other. And I'd done them before from a film project that we had done, but when I still wanted to interview them, and when it came time for me to put the film together, like the thing that made most sense was just a Skype interview. But I knew I didn't want to have like Skype sound, you know, like the sound of just like a laptop, you know, speaker or whatever. And so I asked them to mic themselves, and so I wanted to overlay that on top of like the Skype interview because I wanted to frame it like a talking head interview, like, you know, like the left third or whatever. Because I really wanted to play with the form of like the documentary, and I really wanted to, in this film, like present people with this idea of like a documentary about Standing Rock, but just like disappoint them, you know? Where just if you're not getting explained, you're getting like everything else. That's like why with Cleo, like, I only included when they're reflecting about a story they just told, rather than the story they told itself. And in the same sort of like vein, like having the audio be something a little bit more presence, rather than something like more like representational of a laptop, you know? Like I wanted to play with that sort of representation a little bit of like what you're expecting to hear. And I mean, I don't know, like the audio isn't the best, but still just like, it's like these small little like things that accumulate to then challenge. I don't know, just like play with the expectations of like what you're seeing and like this idea of like veracity or truth, you know, because it's all subjective and it's all very subjective to like my experience, and I want that to be felt through this. And so like mediation with the media for me often in these different sort of forms are part of that. Like this is, it's not so much like solipsistic, this is like my world, but rather it's more like, I don't want you to trust me. I want you to know like this is all choices that I'm making in terms of what I'm presenting you know? And so like that is a different ground from the authoritative like documentary voice of God kind of perspective, you know? I mean, I don't know if it works or not. It's still like, you know, it's still like a work in progress, which is like why I make so many short films, because I just like want each of these ideas to inhabit one film and to be able to sort of testing ground to see how it works. And then also to be in communication with other works, like the Sunflower Siege Engine with the laptop screen. Like I was just like, I don't know how to, I don't want to rip this off the internet, but I want to film it again. I was like, oh yeah, I should like, I want to reference Dislocation Blues in some ways, because I want Richard Oakes to also be present on the screen. And I want like his voice to land in the same sort of way, but also to be felt as an archival sort of subject, but also as something that's still very present. So yeah, I think like communication between different projects, but also just trying to account for where I'm coming from, but then also trying to, I don't know, challenge the expectations of like what an audience might come in expecting for a documentary about Native Americans.
Any more?
This is maybe related to what you were saying earlier about scaffolding, but I was curious if you ever set out to make film or video that is just for yourself, or just for family, or just for Native or Indigenous people that you know, and like, I guess maybe about like your process for deciding what you're putting together for like a wide audience.
I mean, like, I really do think like that, I mean, like, if there's concentric circles like moving out of like who the audience is, like really like I'm at the center, because like I want to make things that are challenging to me, like interesting to me, like focus on the questions that I'm interested in asking. You know, like my heart is critic, you know, but at the same time, it's just like I want these things to communicate something. And then it goes out from just like, you know, like the family, the community, the tribe, like the indigenous, to like everyone else as it goes and goes and goes. So it's like that with all the work, but it changes with different ways, I mean, with different means. Like some of the more abstract stuff, I feel like is for me and for the things that I want to try to communicate without, I don't know, falling into the pitfalls of anthropology or ethnography. But at the same time too, it's just like, you know, how to utilize the form to make things that are, actually, well, here's a good example, like, Phoenixville switch show tonight, and Dislocation Blues would show tonight. So I was working on Dislocation Blues, you know, being at Standing Rock, editing for like 3 or 4 months. It's emotionally exhausting and devastating to work on that film, you know, for obvious reasons. After that, I did not want to edit voices. I did not want to just like do some clean documentary cuts. I wanted to make something in pure abstraction with music and with text and no voices, and so I made painting spells. Because it just like it was doing something else for me, you know? Like it was something like more poetic, it was like engaging in mythology. And it was also a story about healing and just like trying to humanize the person that is telling the story. You know, like who is the myth maker and what are they doing? And so I feel like each of the projects respond to one another in different ways. Like with Power People, which is like screening here this weekend, you know, like it's a lot more of a traditional straight documentary. But my idea behind that is just like, where's the rigor? The rigor is not so much like in how to move through abstraction, but rather how can I tell the story using more conventional forms? And also how can I speak to an audience, but also like not deny them the questions that they're trying to ask, but rather, I don't know, focus on the questions that I'm interested in asking. So I don't know, it's like, it's not so black and white, or it's not so like, I mean, I don't know, it's never easy. Because like, I mean, it's, like I said, like each of these projects for me is a question that I'm trying to answer, but I'm also not trying to put all of my questions and hopes and dreams into one project, but rather put them into conversation with each other. I'm hopefully trying to create a larger sort of like, I don't know, dialogue, lexicon, or space where these things can paint a larger picture maybe.
How much would you say music, being of more cultural or mainstream origin, can inspire a project for you? I imagine in the case of lore, especially, you forged a real aesthetic connection to music as an art form through the story being told. So I'm just wondering, how much can music really spur your creativity?
In such a huge way. I mean, I remember actually, it was like in the spring after Standing Rock, I was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was like teaching as an adjunct in both Milwaukee and in Chicago. So every Monday and Wednesday at 6 a.m. I would have to leave Milwaukee and drive to Chicago to teach my 9 a.m. class. And I'd always get there at 10 a.m. because the traffic is terrible in Chicago. But I remember like one day I was like listening to the radio and that Bobby Darin song, If Not For You, came on. I was like, what is this song? Oh my God. And like I just found it on Spotify and I listened to it for like 3 hours straight down to Chicago. And then on my way back, I listened to another 3 hours straight back up. And what it did is like, it gave me some sort of like emotional, mental framework to approach this project. You know, just like, I think often like, how does the project feel? You know, like, what is it trying to do emotionally? Like Kick the Clouds, same thing with like Courtney Astiles' song. Like that really helps me navigate how to approach a lot of like emotional things with my family, like some really like challenging histories with us. And I didn't know how to approach it, but having some track to edit to, even just like footage, just like for B-roll or whatever, just like, I don't know, it really helps ground me. And so that's the thing that I really try to, I don't know, employ when it comes to music and films, is just like, what is this doing for me? And how can I hope that that affects you in some way as an audience member? I don't know, it's just like sometimes songs like really just, I mean, as we all know, it's like what are the songs we listen to over and over again and how they describe a thing that we can't really explain otherwise. Like that's affect, and so that's what music does for me, or like my first go-to when it comes to trying to describe something in a film or a piece of writing or a piece of work.
Thank you.
We're doing good on time. Are we? I think that's probably all we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much.